So, no more dinosaurs. What next? Quite a bit, actually. So 66 million years ago, an asteroid with the diameter of just over 6 miles struck the Gulf of Mexico and began a series of catastrophes that ensured that nothing larger than a house cat survived, bringing an end to the Cretaceous and, in turn, the Mesozoic era. Oh, you didn't know the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct? That's okay, because I have a playlist going through the entire history of Earth right here. Now, this wasn't quite as bad as the Permian mass extinction, but the aftermath would have appeared almost as bad. A post-apocalyptic wasteland was the prettiest sight you'd see on Earth, and it would take quite some time to come back from this. First though, what did the planet look like from space? Well, this section is normally a lot longer with my time period videos, but describing the Earth's geography during the Paleogene is kind of like just describing how it looks today. The continents, which had long broken up from the supercontinent of Pangaea, were now looking how they do today. But sea levels had dropped dramatically, ridding many of the inland seas, and the Tethys Ocean had now completely closed as India joined the rest of Asia, creating the Himalayan mountain range. South America was also edging closer to North America, which would have vast effects on the life there, which I will get into soon enough. Now, like all time periods, the Paleogene is divided further into epochs. Now, more often than not, people will refer to these epochs rather than the entire period, just because the Cenozoic periods were a lot more recent, so we have much higher resolution of what happened. So paleontologists and geologists are a lot more specific when it comes to the Cenozoic periods. And the first epoch within the Paleogene is the Paleocene. Despite the devastating effects of the asteroid impacts, the climate during this time was more or less how it was in the Cretaceous, being tropical to subtropical with no ice caps, and the average global temperature was approximately 24 to 25 degrees Celsius or 75 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, in the aftermath of the aforementioned extinction, even plants had to try and bounce back. Around a third of the plant species went extinct, and at the start of the Paleocene we see a huge spike of ferns, which are usually the first plants to take over when others die off. The forests at this time were pretty low in numbers, but did jump to usual levels by the end of the Paleocene, where we see vast tropical rainforests, cloud forests, mangrove and swamp forests, as well as savannas. Then jumping into the waters, we see that they had a real mess to try and clean up. Around 90% of planktonic species went extinct, causing a cataclysmic food chain collapse, since these are the primary energy providers of marine trophic systems. Ammonites were now completely gone, corals didn't recover for another 8 million years, and the only marine invertebrates left at first were a few burrowing groups. This is where we see fully modern crustaceans though, which are thought to have evolved from a single surviving assemblage on James Ross Island. We also see the very first sand dollars. Fish actually seem to recover quite quickly, but only around 12% of species went extinct from the KPG. Ray-finned fish diversified massively since empty niches were now left vacant by all the extinct groups of cephalopods. But the larger guys like sharks didn't quite pick up the pace just yet. On land we see that amphibians, for reasons we can't tell for definite, seem largely unaffected throughout this time. So it seems fairly obvious who took over straight away after the non-avian dinosaurs were gone, right? Not as much as you might think. In the wake of the asteroid, the Paleocene was actually a period of uncertainty as to who would actually inherit the Earth. Mammals actually remained fairly small throughout most of this epoch, with the most diverse group from what we can tell being the extinct multituberculates. Three groups that originated in the Cretaceous were starting to show some promise though, those being the placentals, marsupials and monotremes. Meanwhile, the diapsids tried pretty quickly to have another crack at dominance. Birds being the only group of dinosaurs left, and the only ones who I argue still dominate to some degree here, were suddenly gifted trees completely empty of other arboreal predators, skies devoid of pterosaurs, and grounds lacking giant predators. We see most modern groups crop up during the Paleocene, as well as giants such as Pelagornis, Gastornis, and the infamous terror birds. Other reptiles were also taking advantage of the void. Squamates had bounced back by the late Paleocene. with lizards all over the world and the biggest snake in Earth's history that we know of, Titanoboa. Crocodilians, especially freshwater groups, did better than most to begin with here, since the KPG event isn't thought to have affected freshwater environments quite as much, possibly explaining the aforementioned amphibians. And then an event happened known as the PETM, or the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. This was a stage that crossed from the end of the Paleocene epoch into the Eocene epoch, in which we see a prominent negative excursion of delta O18, which basically means that things got hot enough for much of the heavier oxygen isotopes to evaporate and sink back down to concentrate at the cooler poles. Average global temperatures rose to a possible 34.5 degrees Celsius or 94.1 Fahrenheit. And this episode of global warming, likely being caused by volcanism and a change in the Milankovitch cycles, is probably what got the reptiles thinking that their days of dominance weren't quite over just yet. Benthic foraminifera suffered yet again from this, as well as corals, but this may have been a blessing in disguise for the mammals. Many mammalian groups elected to begin migrating north in search for more cooler climates. Not only this, but mammals went for a stage of dwarfing in response to this event to deal with the hotter temperatures, meaning they explored new niches and continued to diversify. Now it's here that we start to see the first true forms of modern groups, such as the ungulates and the primates. The PETM actually saw a fairly sizable rebound after it was done too. Whilst tropical forests were commonplace across the world, even places like Greenland, things cooled rapidly and soon the ice caps grew out of nowhere, ushering the beginning of the latest ice age. Now this drop in temperature would continue dramatically into the next period, but I will have to get into that next time. The areas this affected most were as you get away from the equatorial regions, of which the only groups that could handle these temperatures with their endothermy and fur were the mammals. And now there was truly nothing standing in their way. The Eocene ushered in the first real mammal megafauna, including Euanthitherium, Acinitherium, Entelodonts, and huge predators like Hyaenodon and Andrewsarchus. One group even decided to gradually brave the seas, going from hoofed dog-like mammals to what we more commonly refer to nowadays as whales. It's then when we reach the Oligocene, the final epoch of the Paleogene and the one considered to be the most significant with regards to transitioning from the strange ancient post-Cretaceous world to more modern ecosystems. With the ice caps reaching the breadth of continents, plants receded to the periphery of Antarctica, creating tundras of plants barely clinging to life, whilst tropical plants hit the moist equatorial regions and dry savannas would take hold of the larger continents. And these environments by the Oligocene were filled with extant families. You had three-toed horses, deer, massive camels, and a widely spread group known as the carnivorans, which include all weasels, bears, raccoons, cats, and dogs, as well as giant rhinos such as the biggest terrestrial mammal to ever walk the earth, Phrorusrhacos. Many migrations took place across the northern hemisphere, changing things up for groups across Asia, Europe and North America, whilst Australia and South America remained isolated, leading to some very special fauna indeed. South America in particular showed a high diversity of both old and new world monkeys, with massive pyrotheres, some marsupial relatives and the dominant predator niche differing here since it wasn't filled by a mammal, but in fact a group of dinosaurs. These were the Phrorusrhacids, or as they're more commonly referred to as terrorbirds. Terrorbirds were the dinosaurs' last hurrah at apex predation, and they did bloody well at it. In fact, they were causing terror right up until around 100,000 years ago. As to where they went, that's something I'll be expanding upon when I do the Neogene segment. Now, given how recent the Paleogene was, there are a hell of a lot of groups that we know extensive detail about, most of which I'll be coming to in the next coming weeks, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. But if you feel you can't wait that long, then be sure to check out the link down below that I'll leave for my Patreon, where one of the many benefits you can get is early access to the videos that I upload here on YouTube. But as I'm sure you know by now, each period in Earth's history is bookended by a major faunal change, which most of the time is all thanks to a mass extinction. This isn't always the case though. Sometimes it's not a mass dying and more of a transition from one faunal category to another. The Jurassic was much the same here going into the Cretaceous, and the end of the Paleogene is also where we can see this transition when this period came to an end 23.03 million years ago. The Paleogene overall was a time in which life was resettling down and establishing which group would become dominant. The transition consisted of a wider range of reptiles, avian dinosaurs, and the first mammalian megafauna giving way to more modern looking groups, including one particular group of primates that, for better or worse, would change this entire planet. But I'll be talking more about that when I catch you guys next time.